You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hi guys, and thanks for coming back to the show. You're listening to Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. I am Mighty Blue, and midlife crisis notwithstanding, I'm here to tell you more stories about the Appalachian and other hiking trails. Actually, this week is all about the AT, though I'm definitely open to other trails in this program. Today, we have another member of the class of 2019, my class, but unfortunately, Laura Sheehan, or Rocket, and I didn't meet last year. I had several of you write in and ask me to reach out to Julia. She's got a solid YouTube following, and she graciously agreed to come on the show. I found her engaging and clearly changed by the hike. Julia will be along shortly. Our ATC segment this week is about crisis management. Okay, not the most thrilling subject, but Laura Belleville, Vice President of Conservation and Trail Programs, is here to tackle the question, what does it take managing and protecting the AT in a time of crisis? And don't worry, it's not all about COVID, though of course we do talk about that as well. We'll hear from Laura after Julia. And Bill Tickner, or Mr. President, has arrived in Damascus, the end point of not only his Appalachian Trail journey, if you remember he hiked south from Damascus to Springer earlier, but it also marked the completion of his Triple Crown. A great achievement. Now, I was hoping to catch up with Bill today for his final reflections on his journey, but I'm afraid the technical gremlins in his phone conspired this week to not allow us to catch up. So we'll be hearing from Bill next week. And Bill's completion was intended to feed nicely into another completion, the final chapter of Keith Foskett's Balancing on Blue. This week, as Fozzie signs off, we get the closing reflections of Fozzie and his buddies on the trail. I've really enjoyed experiencing this book with you, but it's time to move on, and I'll be telling you about the next book near the end of the show. But that is all still to come. So let's start today with Laura Sheehan, otherwise known on the trail as Rocket. Here's Julia. Well, today's guest is Laura Sheehan, or Rocket. Hi, Julia. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Not too bad. And when I heard that you were Rocket, I kind of presume that you were a fast hiker, but that isn't the reason you're a Rocket, is it?
It is not the reason, no.
Would you like to share the reason?
Sure. So when starting out the Appalachian Trail, we started in March, so it was pretty chilly, which means in the mornings when you're leaving camp, your nose just is always running. And I was always just shooting snot rockets. My nose always runs when I'm hiking, and it never fails, even in the summer. So it's a very fitting trail name for me. Nice.
And how long did it take you to earn that?
I received it in the Smokies, so about 200 miles.
Wow, cool.
Mm-hmm.
So now you're one of those hikers who set out in your late 20s, having started a couple of careers. What is it, do you think, about the Appalachian Trail that makes people literally upend their lives? Were you needing some sort of a change?
I was 29 years old. I had the career, the house, the white picket fence, and it just didn't feel good enough for me. And so I initially started looking at maybe travel nursing or van life or something to just kind of soothe whatever it was that was going on inside of me. And I had stumbled upon long distance backpacking, and it just made sense that the Appalachian Trail or the Appalachian Trail, however you pronounce it.
How do you pronounce it?
I pronounce it Appalachian. I'm a Yankee, so I'm a Northerner. Means
right.
We pronounce it the taboo way.
All right.
Yeah.
So you were working originally for the Air Force, I believe, and then nursing. So talk us through that. What did that entail, working for the Air Force?
So I joined the Air Force. After high school, I went to college for a year, and I knew that if I stayed in college, I would have either, partied too hard and flunked out, or it just didn't feel good to me. So I joined the Air Force the summer after my freshman year in college, just looking for a way to leave home. The town I grew up in was small and kind of toxic, and just I needed to get away. And so I felt like the military was a great option because I didn't really know what I wanted to do in my life yet. And it really just I escaped the East Coast. I lived in Washington and California. I traveled the world, and it just became this, adventure it taught me responsibility. And I was an airplane mechanic, so I learned a really cool trade, which was very challenging.
Yeah, I bet. So how do you go from there to nursing, though? What was wrong with being an airplane mechanic?
So I worked in a very male-dominated career, and right. I just had been, living in this male-dominated world as a young woman who was very independent. And when I got out of the military, I had no desire to re-enlist. So when I got out, I was headed back home to Pittsburgh, where my family lives, and stopped in Iowa, where my sister lived. Uh-huh. And I ended up living there for 4 years because she was there, had started a family, and I just couldn't leave my niece and nephew. They were just little angels. So I was there. I did 5 or 6 jobs the first year I got out of the military because I had no idea what I wanted to be still. Uh-huh. And a friend of mine was talking about wanting to go to nursing school. And I said, well, I have some of my GI Bill left. I don't really like my job. What if I just go to nursing school? And that was the decision. I had no desire to be a nurse, but I was very lucky because I love being a nurse now.
Oh, really? Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I wonder what you're going to say then. You had no desire to be a nurse, but you kind of grew into that.
Yeah.
And that actually explains in some ways, because I was going to say, unless my notes are wrong, you told me before that it was hard to understand your 20s and that you may have partied too hard. So you were more worried about the possibility of partying too hard. Is that right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So was the need for a calmer life something to do with your need for this type of life?
Yeah, I think I was just sick of the standards of society of you have to have a job and a 401k and you have to have a kid and you have to have this by this age and a car and your status is important and the money you earn is what's important. And I had all of those things and I just still felt like empty. I felt like something was missing and I wasn't willing to go further into my life feeling that empty. And the trail, I think, offered an escape, but also an adventure. And as a 29-year-old woman, we're told, well, now's not the time for your adventure. You had your early 20s to do that. But I wasted my early 20s in the military, partying around the world. And it was a wonderful experience, but I didn't really grow. I didn't really have any memories that I would say, oh, remember that time that I did this and, had an experience that was like important to me.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can certainly imagine that. Certainly having watched some of your YouTube channel this morning as well, and I'm going to come back to that in a minute. So you made the decision to go. How were you able to prepare? Because had you done a bit of hiking already, or was this just a shot from the blue for everybody when you said you were going to do this?
I had no experience. In the past, I called it walking in the woods, where right. I would go to like a local state park and just kind of walk for an hour with my dog and listen to music. Yeah. And I never really thought about how cathartic that was for me until, later into my 20s when I realized that that's where I felt the most at peace. So I got into hiking the fall before I went on the Appalachian Trail. And I prepared by I sold my house in 3 days. I sold everything in my house with the house. I just sold
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I said, take it all. What do you want? And I was really lucky. A company bought my house and they bought all of my furnishings. So I walked out with just a few of my belongings and
if that may mind me saying, interrupt you a second,
sure.
But there's no way back then, is there?
No, I had.
Were you literally getting out of this life because you thought the next 6 months you'd be on the trail? What if you'd hated it on day 2 or something like that?
Then I would have figured it out. I kept thinking, what if I hate this and I am miserable and I leave after 100 miles? What am I going to do? But either way, I did not want to go back to my old life.
Right.
So even if it was the worst experience and I quit at Neal's Gap, I still didn't want to come back to the life that I was living.
Right. So how did you prepare then? What did you do to get your gear? Because, going for, as you say, walks in the woods isn't the same as spending 6 months in the woods.
No.
So how did you find out what you needed?
So I went to REI and I spent a lot of money on heavy gear that is maybe great for the person starting out or the weekender.
Sure.
And after buying everything I thought I could possibly need from REI, I started researching like garage brands and I started following different pages on social media and watching different YouTube videos and realizing, my gear isn't exactly feasible. It's not really going to work here. So just doing research, and I ended up returning a lot of the gear to REI. They have a wonderful return policy, and purchasing brands and equipment that was better suited to hike 2,000 miles.
And did that work out? Did the gear work out for you when you were out there?
Absolutely. I still use all of it to this day. I think I was very lucky. I settled in on a great setup, and I've almost changed nothing, just a few things here and there.
Yeah. And I know your mother particularly was concerned for your safety. So you met a couple of girls through Facebook. Was that because of your mother's concerns or your own concerns about going as a single woman on the trail?
I think both. My mom was so much more at ease when she knew I was meeting 2 other women who were solo backpacking. But also for me, I didn't really research or prepare anything. So I thought maybe relying on their knowledge would be helpful, which it was. They were both far more prepared than I was. And I think just like the feminine aspect of like, let's link up together. We're going to, get into this together, us 3 girls, like out there kicking butt. And it really worked out. And, they're both amazing, special women and still in my life. But
you were with them for quite some time as well, weren't you?
I was with one of the girls for 600 miles. And the other girl I hiked off and on with for the whole first half.
Nice. Mm-hmm. And so did your mother relax a little bit after you were actually decided to start with those women, or was she still nervous most of the time when you were on the trail?
She was nervous until about halfway through the trail. And then at that point she said, I think you've survived this long. I trust that you have the skills now. So she was definitely worried up until then. And
now you've done this, and I know a lot of people think before you go, you're going to take a gun and you're going to take all sorts of sprays and stun guns and stuff like that. Would you do it the same way? Would you start by yourself, or would you still start with a couple of friends you met?
It depends on the trail. So there are trails where I think starting alone is okay, like the Pacific Crest Trail, same as the Appalachian Trail. They're very busy at certain times of the year. But then there's trails like the CDT or the AZT that it might be better to start with somebody just for that safety aspect of wild animals, other people not knowing the terrain. So it would just depend on the trail, I think.
Now, I'm not sure where you were when this happened, but obviously there was the murder on the trail last year. Did that impact your thought process, or were you okay? Were you feeling okay when that happened, that you wanted to carry on, or did you start thinking perhaps you ought to get off?
It absolutely frightened the group that I was with and myself. We woke up, we were getting ready to head into the Shenandoahs. So we were about 300 miles or 250 miles ahead of where the event happened. Yeah. And I remember calling my mom, and that's when I called her and I said, oh, she's going to just tell me I got to come home because this murder happened. And I called her and she said, it is what it is. It's going to happen everywhere in the world. And I'm happy you're okay. But like, she was the least concerned out of anyone, which made me feel more secure in continuing on. She was afraid this entire time. And then once this event happened, she kind of was like, it could happen to anyone. And I'm glad you're safe. And she knew how important the trail was to me. And I think like her idea of don't let one event deter you from your goal was super helpful.
That was helpful. Mm-hmm. I've talked about this on the trail before, whether it's your spouse, your partner, your parent, your kid, or whatever, having support from home means so much more than anybody really realizes until they get out there, doesn't it?
Oh, it's so great knowing that you have people cheering you on back home.
Yeah, you need that. So what about your friends? Did they have confidence you could do this?
Well, there was a betting pool of how long I would last. And I believe the longest was 90 days from my mother. So,
impressive.
Yeah, so I had to make it at least 90 days to beat all of them.
What was the shortest?
I think my sister said I would make it 14 days or less.
All right, impressive.
Yeah.
That's great. Now, I know that you blogged for the Trek and that you started a video channel even before you knew you were going to through hike.
Yeah.
And certainly before you knew that you'd like it. Did that put some extra pressure on you, or was the video channel for more than just this through hike? The
videos were just, I like to think of them as a moving diary, like a video journal. And I think I would have done them regardless. But for me, I think it definitely added some pressure because there were times where it's like, I really am having just a terrible time. I'm really miserable. And I didn't want to be that person that's crying on video and saying, I hate this, I want to go home. So I think it almost forced me to find positive things happening around me, which was almost a good thing. And it held me accountable. And I just love getting to look back personally and just getting to see my friends and the things that we were doing on trail. So it definitely added some pressure.
Including crying, by the way, but once again, I'm going to come to that in a minute.
I only cried one time on video.
I'm not talking about you crying, I'm talking about the whole thing, but we'll come to that in a minute. So what was the purpose of the YouTube channel? Are you going to make something of this now that you're back? Or are you going to continue? You're obviously going to, you've carried on using it. And what are you going to do with it? You're going to log other hikes in the future?
I would love to. And also maybe eventually just turn it into something travel inspiration. I'm not sure, but definitely I think it makes me, for me, just getting to relive my experiences on trail is super, therapeutic for me when I come home. So I would absolutely still be, sharing my experiences coming up.
Sure. So you start out, you got all the right gear now. How long did it take before you realized that this was a lifestyle that you could do, that suited you? What was it about, and what was it about long distance hiking that really worked for you?
Oh, there's so much to unpack with this question, because I think I never really felt like I was actually going to make it until the very end. But the whole time I just kept thinking, even up to Maine, I kept thinking I'm going to slip and fall and break something or sprain my ankle and have to be taken off trail.
I guess that does get worse towards the end, doesn't it?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
That, yes.
Yeah. Especially when you're in the whites and it's wet and slippery and you're just falling all the time, and roots just dive out of nowhere and trip you. I don't know where they come from, but I think when I got into Virginia, I kind of went off on my own for a few weeks and I just did some big mileage, and I was really proud of mentally, physically, emotionally where I was. And that's when I realized that this was a life that I really enjoyed. And I really felt powerful. Even though I wasn't the fastest or the biggest mileage person, I still felt powerful. And the fact that I was doing it, if you look at the map of the Appalachian Trail, it is crazy that we actually walk that entire thing.
It's bloody endless. Isn't it?
And each day you're like, oh, I've only made it this tiny little bit. But at the end, it's this monumental achievement. And it's just, I think everyone that does portions or all of it is just so powerful.
Well, I remember getting into Newell Gap last year and in 2014 and looking at the map, because they've got one in there. And I'd moved about, it felt like I'd been on the trail forever. And I'd moved about a tenth of an inch, I think, up this map. And I thought to myself, I looked at the rest of it, I thought, that is just impossible. So I never really considered I can do it. I could even do it until about 500 miles ago. And then I started worrying that I'd fall over as well. Mm-hmm. So I kind of relate to what you're saying there. So you enjoyed it, you thought it was fun, and you started out from Springer with those girls. But from Harper's, you developed a group, I think it was about 6 or maybe 8 people, who pretty much stuck together to the end. And it's special to share these experiences with people, but did you lose some of the, and you used the expression when we spoke before, did you lose some of the peace and cathartic energy that you spoke about when we chatted previously? Because it seemed to me that you were really gaining a lot from that peace and cathartic energy. And I wonder if that changed a little bit with a group of about 6 to 8 people.
So I think the great thing about the trail is you have a lot of time to figure out what's important to you. Yeah. And I spent 500 miles of Virginia pretty much on my own with a very small group of people, just kind of pushing miles, seeing how I felt to do it alone, just enjoying that aspect, that challenge. And when I linked up with my second trail family, we would camp together and eat lunch together. But throughout the day, if you wanted to, you could hike the entire day alone. And
Sure.
A lot of the times that's what I do. I'd start in the morning alone because I was not the slowest hiker, but I'd like to get out first just so I could take longer breaks throughout the day.
Sure.
And, I always spent my first 5 or 6, 7 miles with no music, no buddy, and just processing my thoughts for the day. And I think, having 3 hours a day to do that was amazing. And then at lunchtime, I'd link up with my friends and maybe I would hike with 1 or 2 other people. We would chat. And then depending on our paces, you would go on your own and then see them at camp. So I think I had the best of both worlds because I was able to process, have that peace and quiet, but also have a community that I could rely on throughout the day. So I think it almost was more beneficial to have them at the end.
So they were effective. You can make the choice, yeah. But sometimes, though, you have spent so long inside your head, don't you, that it drives you crazy. Well, for me, it drove me crazy. Certainly on my first hike, it was just too much time in my head. And in the end, like you, I didn't have headphones in to start the day, but I had to put headphones in because I was driving myself crazy when I was going along.
Yes.
Now,
yeah.
I really want to talk about your last couple of days now, because I watched the last 2 videos this morning. I got the chills watching it. It was the sense of community that you shared, but it was also the remarkable emotions that you're all feeling on going into the 100-mile wilderness, and there were kind of tears all round. Can you articulate what that moment was like, especially to share it with a group you've hiked over 1,000 miles with?
Oh, it was. So we stayed at Shaw's, and I can't remember the gentleman that runs Shaw's. I forget his trail name.
Oh, I never remember trail names.
Yeah, but he dropped us off in groups, and when he dropped us off, he gave us this speech, and it was because he had through-hiked years before with his wife.
Yeah,
and he gave us this speech, and it was just really like kind of hit home that he was like, it's never about the ending. Like these last couple days you have are really, you need to soak up the memory of this trail with your loved ones that you've made on this trail. And so Stix was the tall French woman that started the tear parade. A lot of people had started crying like days and weeks before, just like at random views or at random times. And we got to the 100-mile wilderness sign where it says like, have 10 days worth of food, blah, 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 so on and so forth. And we turn around and Stix is just blubbering. And then Nugs, my friend Nugget, she was also blubbering. And then Bruiser started crying, and then Bacon shed a tear, and everyone just was like, it was like, oh my gosh, this is the final stretch, and this is our last chance to just love the heck out of this experience. And so I am the kind of person that I laugh when I'm emotional, and that's why in the video you see me just like losing it because I can't. And it was just funny seeing this group of really strong, powerful people that have done all of these miles, and we're just blubbering idiots at this sign. And it was really special. The 100-mile wilderness with the people that I hiked it with was like almost unparalleled. We really just soaked up the last few days of this like amazing experience.
Yeah, funny enough, my experience in the 100-mile wilderness first time was we actually slack-packed the first even 4 days of the first 100-mile wilderness. We went back to Shaw's each night, which was ridiculous, I know. And it involved a 2-hour drive down a forest road as well on the 4th day. Mm-hmm. So it was terrible, really, because I love the idea of being in the 100-mile wilderness and not being able to go back. And for me to get in there when I went last year, I enjoyed the 100-mile wilderness more the second time because you literally are in a wilderness, aren't you?
Yeah, it was really nice.
Yeah, I bet. So you got your first view of Katahdin from, and I think it's called Pemamdumcut Lake, that lake where you've got the rocks and that. And I've got that picture myself there on both my hikes, and you said that you were overwhelmed for it. For me, that moment brings the whole 6 months into focus. Mm-hmm. You've been longing to see Katahdin, and now it's here. Is that how you felt as well?
Yeah, I didn't even know what it looked like because, like I said, I had done no research. So I tried not to do too much research because I wanted it always to be new. And there was a sign when you're going up the trail and it says like Katahdin, view of Katahdin, like right here. And I was the first person to get there in the morning because like I always camped out or hiked out first in the morning.
Sure.
And I like looked, and it's this massive, huge mountain right there. And it looks like you could throw a rock and hit it, but you're still, 50 miles away?
Yeah, it's about 40 or 50 trail miles away, isn't it?
Yep.
And it seems like it dominates the sky, doesn't it?
Yeah, just this big ridged mountain. And I remember sitting there and like I was saying in the video, I was overwhelmed, but my body was just like empty because I finally saw the end. This whole time you're imagining the trail in this like long, long path, but then you see the actual ending. And
sure.
It was crazy. We sat there for like 2 hours and just stared at it.
Was it physically debilitating for you? Or, I mean, you're younger, obviously, much younger than me and fitter, obviously. Did you find that the physicality, because I always say people, you're going to get the physicality. Did you feel super strong at that point and ready to carry on? Or were you starting to get wasted by then?
By that point, I was lucky to be upright. I mean, right. I feel like the second half, I had a lot of knee problems. I think I tore a ligament behind my left kneecap, and I still have knee pain to this day, actually. But the second half I was in excruciating knee pain for almost the entire 1,200 miles. And wow. Yeah, just, having to focus on my pain. I mean, there was times where it went away, but I mean, every day I had at least some experience with it. So by the end,
especially in New Hampshire and Maine as well, going down, some of those downs are ridiculous, aren't they?
From Mount Washington, the next 10 miles it tried to kill us. It was all rocks. And then coming down Mount Madison, I believe is what it was. It's just a rocky boulder jumping. I remember it took us 8 hours to go 10 miles that day. Yeah. It was insane. And we were just miserable by the end of it. And I kept thinking if I survive New Hampshire, I'll be proud.
But Maine is still tough, isn't it? I mean, it's not as if, you get through the whites, it's all over. You've still got some really tough mountains to climb, haven't you?
Oh, absolutely. I think the beauty of Maine made it feel easier for me because the sunsets every night was just beautiful.
Yeah, fantastic. And then you started your last day video by doing what I did every single morning. You deflated your airbag while you're still in your bed. Yeah. That is the only way to get out of bed, isn't it?
It's the only way.
Because I thought to myself, I've just got to get up. And as soon as I saw you lift your hand up in the video, I thought, I know what you're going to do.
Yeah.
And you did. But it's a great way to get you moving, definitely is. Mm-hmm. And the weather must have held from my summit day, because I summited on the Friday, the 23rd, a couple of days before you, because you also had a glorious day with great views all around. But right near the top, because I presume once again you'd started early and gone ahead of the others, perhaps, I don't know, but you stopped and sat on a rock and waited for your team to catch up. And that was only about 100 yards from the top, I believe.
Yeah, less than a mile.
Tell us about those few moments, because that must have been quite something.
So I'm kind of bummed about this day because when we left in the morning, we all left together. That was the only day I slack packed. And everyone, we're cruising up the mountain and everyone wanted to stop for a break, and we stopped. And then I was like, okay, guys, let's get going. And I ended up hiking out with one of the most amazing people I've ever met on trail. His name is Monk. He was just this guiding light for our trail family at the very end.
In what way?
He had trained in monasteries and meditation and just mindfulness. And there was days where some of our trail family members were just tapped out. We were angry. We were irritated. We had been together for 3 months every day. And we would go and talk to Monk, and I'd say, Monk, I'm feeling this way. And he was the group therapist. And he hiked on his own, but he would always be at camp with us. And he ended up spending the last night before we all flew home, camping or at the cabins that we were at. And he and I kind of hiked up the last little bit together with our friend Jay Stroke. So us three kind of just went and just kind of mobbed up at the mountain. And then I realized when we were pretty close that my trail family wasn't even close. They have taken a longer break.
Sure.
And so I absolutely could not summit without them. So I said, you guys go ahead. I'm going to sit here and I'm going to hang out. And I'm going to let them catch up because, I cannot finish this without them. And so it was really cool that they were like, we thought you just summited and been on your way back down. And we were so mad. And I'm like, well, I didn't know you guys weren't behind me. And so I wish I would have stayed with them for those last, 6 miles. But I really got to just connect with Monk at the very end. And he's still one of the people when I think of to just super inspiring that, I got to share those last couple miles with him.
And then, of course, they caught up with you and you got to the top, and then the French girl was sobbing her heart out. Mm-hmm. Then another girl was sobbing her heart out. Mm-hmm. Was it a relief to be finished? Were you glad it was over, or did you think, oh my God, I've got to go back home to normal life now? Or some sort of normal life?
I so wanted it to end, but I so wanted it to never end.
That's right.
I was tired. I was hungry. My body was just broken. My mind was starting to, falter. But I also didn't going back to normal life just seemed even more miserable. So I was really torn because I was so tired, but I was so rejuvenated, emotionally.
Was everybody feeling that way? Because, you've been with that family for 1,000 miles. That's a lot to not to go through, but a lot to experience together. Did you all feel kind of bittersweet about it?
Absolutely. And when we realized that this might be the only time that we're all together again,
yes.
It was so sad the last night because a lot of our trail members, they lived overseas, and we had planned to see them at trail days this year.
Yeah.
And when that was canceled, it broke all of our hearts because that was our chance to see each other again. And hopefully we'll get the opportunity someday down the line.
And then, of course, there's those moments because you then skip forward, you go down the mountain, and you went down a different route down, didn't you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I went down A-Ball.
Right. Why was that? Were you by yourself, or did you all go down that way?
Well, we decided that A-Ball would be the easiest route down with the shortest distance. So the Hunt Trail was kind of tough because you are climbing. There was that rebar hang where you had to like throw your leg up, and I could not see myself getting down that safely because
it was tougher getting down. I came down the same way. I came down the Hunt Trail, and I found it both times. It took me longer to get down than it did to get up. It took me 4 hours to get up there and down, and 5 to get down. Yeah, just exhausting.
A-Ball was, there was a lot of like little pebbles, so I surfed down A-Ball like miles. Like it was also very, very unsafe. But I got down A-Ball in like 2 hours, so it was much quicker.
Wow, cool. Yeah, cool. So you say goodbye to people. Now, most people have to make their way to an airport, catch a lift or something, but you had the ultimate piece of trail magic in the end, didn't you? Which is just amazing. Yeah. Tell us about that. That was incredible.
The most lucky person on the world, I feel like sometimes that I am. I had met a gentleman, his name was Colonel Jack, in the Shenandoahs, and he had through hiked the year before, but he was just coming out to like get a weekend in the Shenandoahs. Sure. And he said, "Oh my gosh, I've seen your videos. Like that's really cool. I hiked last year." And he said, "Let me get your number, and when you come into Boiling Springs, let me know. I'll do some trail magic." So got his number, and we stayed in touch. And Boiling Springs, he gave us some trail magic. We got to stay at his beautiful house. His wife and him made dinner for us. Nice. And then at the end, he owns a company where he flies products around. He like has to fly his products around, and he had a business in Maine, and so he messaged me when he knew we were kind of getting ready to finish. He said, "Hey, I have a shipment to deliver in Maine in August. Let me know when you're finishing, and I'll just fly you home." So he has like a six-seater plane, and
of course he did.
Yeah, he flew into what's the last town? It's not
Millinocket.
Millinocket, yeah. He flies into the Millinocket airfield where they do skydiving out of. Flies in, picks me and 3 other people up, and flies us to our each of our own airports. It was insane.
That is wonderful. That was really wonderful. I'd obviously heard about you before. I didn't know you'd done that. I don't know anybody who's done that, which is pretty damn cool. So what's the future then? You're going to go because you did mention right at the very beginning, van life. Is that something for you? Because and the reason I asked this is you sold everything, didn't you? You came back to whatever your real life was. You came back to a different life, didn't you?
Mm-hmm, I did.
So what did you come back to?
So I ended up going back to my job in Pittsburgh. I live in an apartment. But I just live a lot more minimally. I live with less, and I'm happier with less. And my goal was just to stay here through the winter and leave this past spring to go on another long trail. But as we all know, that didn't happen, which changed my plans. So my goal is I have a few things in the works that I don't want to give away, but there will be a few long trails in my future if COVID goes according. So that will be my plan. But eventually I think not so much van life because I have a dog and a cat and I would need heat and air conditioning, but I'm looking at camper life.
Nice.
Yeah.
That wouldn't suck either, would it? It'd be great.
Mm-hmm.
So as a last thought, what would you say to a young woman out there now who's considering doing this? Because I know one of the things, I've seen a lot of posts on Facebook this year, it seems a lot of people are considering doing this, but I think possibly because of the murder that happened last year, a number of women are nervous about doing it by themselves. Would you recommend doing what you did, or would you just say, just go for it, you'll be fine?
I would say we can never know what the future is going to be like. And if you don't do something because you're afraid of the negative outcomes, you'll never do anything. If you are so worried about the possibility of getting hurt or injured or attacked, like that will keep you from doing the things that you really want. And although the event that happened last year was devastating, and Kirby, the woman that was attacked as well, who survived, she had plans to go back out and do the Appalachian Trail again. So if she can go out and do this again, then anyone can.
Yeah, that's fair comment. Fair comment. Well, look, I really appreciate you coming and chatting to us. I think I think what you did was you're another of the class of 2019, but to sell everything and go and do this without even knowing whether you'd like it, that was a brave move to do.
Stupid or brave?
I didn't say stupid. It turned out to be brave, didn't it? So that's always a good thing. But thanks very much for coming on and sharing your story.
Thank you so much for having me. It was an amazing experience.
Appreciate it. Speak to you soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.
I must say I found her to be an insightful hiker, and she clearly recognised changes in herself. Many people have observed changes in their lives as a result of a long-distance hike. So, as I've said several times before, be careful what you wish for if you ever decide to put your life on hold and spend 5 or 6 months in the woods. You may not be prepared for what comes next. Before we get on to the ATC, it's time to thank the supporters of the show who have helped out with a donation this week. Jennifer Greiker is a monthly donor. Thank you, Jennifer. And we had a new donor this week, Stacey Crabel. Stacey actually wrote me an email, part of which I'd like to share with you all. Her teenage daughter is hiking the AT next year, and Stacey says, as her mother, the first thing that came to mind was images of her injured and shivering in the woods alone, with no access to food, shelter or clean water, surrounded by angry bears and criminals. I came across your podcast and look forward to a new episode each day on my runs. And this is the important part. She says, you completely shifted my perspective. I'm now so excited for her and know this will be an amazing experience. Your podcasts do a beautiful job of conveying the reality of life on the trail and the people along the way. Thank you for giving this mother a bit of peace. Now, I'm sharing that with you all for a specific purpose, because if we can help ease the worry of just one mother, a husband, a wife, or a child, then we made an impact. Listening to Julia today should further ease Stacey's mind. So thank you, Stacey, for not only your donation, but also for letting me know that I'm on the right track with this podcast. If you want to donate to our show, then go to hikingradionetwork.com and click on one of the donate buttons there. You'll then be able to make a one-off donation like Stacey or a monthly pledge like Jennifer. Thank you so much. Now, Laura Belleville of the ATC. And this week's subject is, what does it take? Managing and protecting the AT in a time of crisis. Here's Laura. I'd like to introduce you to Laura Belleville, Vice President of Conservation and Trail Programs. Hi, Laura. How are you?
Good. How are you, Steve?
Well, not too bad. Once we've sorted out one sound issues, hopefully that's going to work. And when we got the subjects, your subject is, what does it take managing and protecting the AT in a time of crisis? And you quite rightly said to me, we don't want to talk about COVID all the time. So tell us, what are some of the crisis situations on the AT? And we will come back to COVID, obviously, because that's the big one this year. What are the things you regard as crisis situations?
Sure. Well, one of the things at the top of my list these days is weather. You know, I think we're seeing different weather patterns now in the Appalachians, some of that likely due to climate change. So we get storms now that are far more severe than a couple decades ago. We, acknowledge that there are more hurricanes sometimes heading right up the Appalachians. And so for ATC, that's concerning because we're just, we want to be able to communicate with folks when those kinds of conditions present themselves. And safety is really important. And trying to help people understand that, the weather can change pretty quickly, especially, in the summertime. I think people, start to recognize that, but when things come up pretty quickly, whether it's these microburst storms or even major hurricanes, that's, in my mind, that's a crisis situation. And it's something we're seeing more often now. In other cases, heavy use. Sometimes we have sites where we have far more people hiking a section or going to a very popular overlook than the area can sustain. And while it may not be the kind of crisis that puts, health or safety on the line, it does have an impact on resources, and we consider that in some cases to be a crisis.
Okay. Well, actually, I don't want to gloss over weather right now, because I agree with you that the storms can be incredibly quick, incredibly severe, but also hot weather. Seems to me that I'm hearing more hot weather this year. Do you see that as a potential crisis?
Yes. So with the hot weather, we're seeing, a lot more wells drying up or water sources drying up. So, there are sections of trail, especially in the South in the late summer, early fall, where at one point in time you could easily find water. And nowadays you can go for 20 plus miles and not have any water. Sure.
How do you manage that though?
We can't manage that very easily. But, we do try to get the word out and have people thinking about, that kind of situation because, if folks aren't carrying sufficient amount of water or they're not aware of where the water sources are, or where they may be dry, they can really put themselves in a world of hurt. So there's not, like I said, there's not a lot that we can do in terms of affecting the day-to-day weather, but, we are thinking about climate change. We are thinking about our role, especially on the policy front, and looking at ways to mitigate climate change, either with our resource management work or, looking at better policies so that we can, hopefully as a nation hold the line on the rate of climate change today, because if it continues to get worse, it'll make it a little bit more difficult to hike for sure.
Sure. And I know that when I had some contact with the ATC management a couple of years ago, there was quite a bit of lobbying going on in the administration. Does that continue? Are we quite politically active still?
We are. We have a staff position based in Washington, D.C. That position actually was initially hired to focus on federal policy related to climate change and related to helping us protect lands that in some cases provide for great views, but in other cases protect lands that are resilient to climate change or that sequester carbon. So those are the kinds of things that we're looking at now to do our part to help abate climate change so that the hiking community continue to have a great experience.
Well, funny enough, I was seeing a post the other day on Facebook. I hate doing this, but I just can't resist it sometimes, especially recently. Seeing on Facebook about some rocks being defaced through spray paint and so on. And that appears to be more and more of a problem. Is that a societal, cultural thing? Or is there, does the ATC actually have any teeth to deal with that sort of thing? Or what do? You just let people know there's issues and try to identify who the people are?
Yeah, I would consider that, in a way, one of those localized times of crisis. Once graffiti starts in an area, it can be super difficult to make it stop. But sure. We've had dedicated volunteers, particularly in areas where graffiti has been happening over and over again. Every time it happens, they go right out there and clean the graffiti off in an attempt to try to, keep people from coming back out and doing it again. Because what happens is when people see graffiti, they think it's okay to, add their little bit of art to the rocks. And I think in some cases, people aren't even aware that, painting rocks or adding graffiti in areas is not cool. So the other thing we try to do is just educate people, clean it up and educate as much as possible. And, as a last resort, we, sometimes have to ask law enforcement to get involved.
Make that the first resort. Get them in there. I'm sure they'd love to go for a little hike in there.
Now, I wish we had a lot more folks working on law enforcement because that might make it easier to, deal with the big ticket issues while, trying to keep people from defacing, public lands.
I've got to say though, anecdotally, I never saw it ever once. And also anecdotally, that my through hike in 2014, I saw a lot of defacing of shelters. I saw I didn't see it happening, but I saw it had been defaced. I saw them a lot cleaner in 2019 than they were in 2014. So people have obviously been doing some work there to try to keep it better, haven't they?
Yeah, we had a couple of years where there were a few hikers, you may be aware of this, that were taking to tagging. So every shelter that they went to, they would have a tag that was unique to them, and they started marking up shelters. And just like rock faces or other places, as soon as people start to deface a shelter or a rock or whatever, it gives sort of the impression that it's okay. And so more people do it. And so we did pursue some folks that we knew were tagging a couple of years ago and really had a heavy education campaign, but also law enforcement was involved in a couple of cases, and folks were fined, and set the record straight on tagging is a bad thing for sure.
Absolutely. And you mentioned you've mentioned use, you've mentioned weather, and there are also local and regional issues, aren't there, like crime and various safety issues and so on. So once again, are they particularly localized, or are there issues of that nature all the way up the trail?
Yeah, in a lot of cases, there are small crimes that could happen on the trail. Sometimes there's theft, sometimes there's a harassment, and those seem to be relatively small and manageable.
They're normally near the roads as well, aren't they? That's the point.
Yes. And, we really encourage people to report those things. Obviously, if they're severe enough, call 911,
Sure.
Report the situation. I think, being able to track and record, especially somebody that, could be problematic, not just in one area, but then, up and down the trail. There's also a National Park Service dispatch number that we encourage people to call, especially if it's not an emergency, but you want to make the Park Service aware of a situation. You can call that number to let people know about tagging, for instance, or resource damage, or somebody that has been problematic. We always encourage people to call 911 if they don't feel comfortable, or if they're seeing something that is very problematic.
Well, and I don't know whether you do this. This is just an idea I had, but you can dismiss it as you wish, or may say it's stupid. I know that when I was hiking, I use gut hooks quite a bit, and gut hooks have a really good system of being able to enter stuff in there. So you, as the ATC, could have your own. I don't know whether you've probably already got your own thing. You could put an announcement out there, and people would know about it pretty quickly if it was on gut hooks.
Yeah, we have worked with gut hooks in the past on certain situations, and that's something we would love to do more of going forward, especially as we implement our new strategic plan and are thinking about new and innovative ways to communicate more broadly with the hiking community. I know a lot of thru hikers use gut hooks. There's so many day hikers out now. I don't know how many people are using gut hooks that are just out day hiking. I think it's an incredibly useful tool. So we're, huddling with our communication staff and trying to think about ways that we can be most effective in helping people understand, how to stay safe, or when there's a problem, and that sort of thing.
Sure. Well, let's turn to COVID now. How did it unfold as far as you're concerned? What has the role of the ATC been, and how effective do you think it's been this year?
Well, I think that in the grand scheme of ATC working during a time of a global pandemic, I think we moved pretty quickly to come to terms with many partners on how to move forward. So I think it was in early March when we were starting to hear that there's this issue called COVID, and that it's a problem someplace else, but not here yet. And I think it was about 2 weeks later where, everything's shut down pretty quickly. And shortly after that, we pulled together an adaptive recovery task force with representatives from the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, from the National Park Service, from the Forest Service, from some of our AT clubs, and members of our Stewardship Council, which is the advisory body on trail management and conservation for the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, to essentially get on the same page about how we would move forward. Because we're a multi-jurisdictional unit of the National Park Service, there are slightly different rules or thinking around management details for the most part, not really big picture issues. And COVID was a case where we wanted to make sure we were sending out, consistent messaging across the 14 states, across all of the land management agencies. And so this task force put together a document that we shared widely with our volunteer base, and that we used to communicate with hikers so folks understood where we were coming from. And that provided guidance even to our staff about, when do they drive, where do they go, how do they stay safe. And I thought that the task force was a great representation of how well our cooperative management system operates. at a time when people really didn't know, well, what was going on, or
Sure,
we had a lot of
sure.
information. We called on, so it was interesting. One of our volunteers was a former employee at the Center for Disease Control. So
Right.
he was also able to, give us some
Sure.
really useful and important guidance as we had we had regular conversations, weekly conversations early on. And now, we are regrouping as we think forward about the
Sure.
2021 hiking season and, closing out the current season. What did we learn? How do we adapt? What do we do differently?
Sure. And as I say, the subject is protecting the AT. How did you protect the AT during that time? If none of you guys went in there, you obviously kept the crews out for quite a while. What did they find when they got in there? Did they find it wasn't too bad?
Well, I think, one of the things, I think this during the spring is when we have a decent number of storms.
Sure.
That's when some of the blowdowns come down. And
Sure.
so, those are areas where, that work got pushed back for sure until volunteers got back out into the field sometime around June. There was more litter at trailheads, some areas that would be brushed regularly they were more overgrown than they would have been normally if we have volunteers out in April, especially.
The blowdowns must have been horrendous, I would have thought, because those guys get out there straight away, don't they, when a blowdown occurs? If they weren't out there for about 4 or 5 months, man, that must have been a nightmare.
Yeah, I didn't hear from anyone that they had a huge number of blowdowns in any one section, but volunteers on the AT are an amazing bunch.
Yes.
And I think there are a lot of times when they do an incredible amount of work, and we don't always hear about all of the details. We had a work day and we went out and we did everything that we said we were going to do, and by God, it's done. And
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Nobody ever complained. Nobody ever said, well, there were way more blowdowns than we could ever possibly handle. And so my sense is that the number of blowdowns weren't more than that folks would have normally dealt with. It's just that it was deferred over some period of time until they could get out there and do that. And so, what happens, people walk around blowdowns and we just have more resource damage. So, we haven't taken a lot of data, taken complete stock of all those impacts, but I'm sure they're out there.
Yeah. So tell us finally, how can, apart from the pat answer, do what we tell you, how can hikers help the ATC and management partners when a crisis does arise?
Yeah, I think, like I said earlier, certainly reporting things. Definitely 911. ATC has an incident report form on our website. We really encourage people to take the time to let us know what's going on. That's first and foremost. Secondly, when ATC and our cooperative management partners provide guidance aimed at keeping people as safe as possible, we really appreciate it when folks take that guidance to heart and follow it as much as possible. That allows us, in some cases, to protect an area that, may need additional support, whether that's from law enforcement or whether that's from, additional volunteers getting out. We just need folks to pay attention and, think about the whole when they hike, that, while the hike generally is for the individual, when there are so many people out hiking, it really becomes for the whole. And so the more that everybody can really play by the rules, I think the more that, everybody can enjoy the AT, in as safely as possible.
Yeah, I must say, when I was thinking about having this conversation, and I've asked this of one of your colleagues before, what's it going to be like in 20 years? And if we continue to get hotter and hotter and the water dries up, it's going to be quite a substantial problem there, isn't there, somewhere down the line?
Well, it's interesting. It's not, the impacts of climate change are not the same across the entire 14 states.
No, of course.
We did some modeling a few years ago with one of our former board members, a guy named Lenny Bernstein, who was very active in the climate change research scene. He was with the International Panel on Climate Change, and contributed a lot of thinking to ATC's position on climate change and how we should behave as an organization. So certainly, we need to own how much carbon we put out into the atmosphere,
yeah, of course.
and be as conservation minded about that as possible. And then, of course, like I mentioned, our policy work and our land acquisition work all contribute to hopefully not making it a lot worse in 20 years. So we all have to do our part there, and step up and pay attention and and contribute as much as possible. So I think that it's hard to predict definitively, but some of the models that we were looking at showed that in the southern portion of the trail, things would get drier for longer periods of time and get hotter. But actually up in New England, the predictions are that it would get, warmer, not quite as much as in the south, but it would get wetter.
So the thing is then, people, in many ways, that makes people more inclined to start earlier, I suspect. If it means you want a bit of snow melt and a bit of rain in the south, and hopefully you can get plenty of water, and then you get to a more pleasant north. So start in February. February.
People adapt, right?
Yeah, they do. Yeah, absolutely.
We'll find new ways to manage their experience. I remember bumping into a father who was through hiking with his 8-year-old son. This was probably about 10 years ago.
Wow.
And he told me at that time that, we're doing the anti-Lyme disease hike. So he predicted, when ticks might be most prevalent in any section of the trail at any given time, and flip-flop around the trail to adapt to that, because he didn't, he was concerned about his son at that time.
Of course, of course. Very good, very good. Well, look, I appreciate you giving us some insights here, and obviously we all want the trail to stay around. So basically, hikers should try their best to listen to advice and give advice back to the ATC when they feel, or at least notification back to the ATC when they see something that needs attending.
Absolutely. We're one big happy trail family, and so, we want to keep it that way.
That's right. Well, thanks for joining us. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, Steve.
Bye.
Bye.
Do you know what? I'm thrilled that the ATC took this opportunity to share the full range of issues in which they involved themselves on behalf of the Appalachian Trail. From several of my emails, you appear to be enjoying them as well, so I hope that even when we finished our current schedule of interviews and topics, they'll still return to the show and use the podcast as part of their outreach to the hiking community. Actually, to that end, please make sure that you share these shows on social media if you enjoy them, and tell your friends. I noticed a couple of things on my own through hike last year. I was surprised at the number of people who knew me, but I was equally surprised by the number of people who had never heard of me or my podcast and couldn't give a crap. So please spread the word. As I mentioned earlier, Bill Tickner couldn't make the show today, so we're going to conclude Fozzie's Balancing on Blue and the reflections of his tramley from that year's hike. I found myself nodding in understanding with several of the guys. But before we get on to that, I wanted to let you know that Larry Luxembourg, who's the president of the Appalachian Trail Museum in Pine Grove Furnace State Park, has given me permission to read his book, Walking the Appalachian Trail. I'll be starting that next week, and I'm looking forward to it. Finally today, Fozzie's crew all weigh in on their personal experience after hiking the AT with Fozzie and each other. As I mentioned just now, those of us who've done this will recognise many of the feelings and sentiments expressed. I'll see you next week. Chapter 15. The Separating. Peter, PJ, Semo. Resting my injury was a frustrating decision to make. My wilderness gift had been snatched before I unwrapped it. After a month's break, I returned, reaching Katahdin on October the 5th. I'm proud of what I achieved. I rarely speak of my trip, but it holds a common bond and many find it fascinating. People's eyes light up at my achievement. It helps them understand where I've come from and the person I am. It imbues wonder and curiosity, and that's all I hoped for, to inspire others with nature and to try the AT themselves. I worked at a hostel in Dalton, Massachusetts before returning home to Latrobe, Pennsylvania. I struggled to readjust in society, and post-hike depression disturbed me. I experienced a tremendous loss, like a family death. My adventurous urges disappeared and the memories fogged over. The winter was tough. I didn't know where I was heading, and I didn't care. I improved during the spring and worked at an adventure park, making fantastic friends. I earned promotion in the summer to ride supervisor, and I'm happy. The trail imparted a life understanding and helped me on my journey, like finding a meaningful book in the library with specific answers. I'm confident, I know where I'm heading, and I'm determined to get there. My goal is the Pacific Crest Trail, the Continental Divide Trail, and the Triple Crown. Socialising and communicating are easier, and I realise what excites people. I hope I inspire them to search for meaning in their lives. We're full of possibilities and capable of wonderful achievements. I value my friends and family more. I miss my dad dearly, but he'd be proud of my journey and my battle to succeed. Whilst I have regrets about the events between us, I've made peace with myself. I love coming home where I can talk to my brother, my mum or my sister. I'm loved and I couldn't be happier. The trail has been a philosopher's stone and I wouldn't be where I am without it. Philip Lasagna Kaleli. The train was a wise choice of transport to return home. It gave me 9 hours to reflect, but I didn't figure much out. My dad collected me and it thrilled me to see him. We'd grown closer and I realised how important family was. I was unsure of my next move, but I had to work. Returning to my old job was the easiest option. Despite my original escape from grilling burgers, I had money coming in and breathing space. It was an enormous mistake. I was peaking from the AT on a high from my achievement, and no one's negativity affected me. However, after 2 months, I'd returned to where I'd been before my hike, and I didn't like it. I missed the trail, the amazing people, and the simple existence I'd thrived on. I planned more adventures. If escaping made me happy, planning another trip took my mind off work. I researched North Carolina's Mountains to Sea Trail and cycling across America. These anticipations reminded me that I had a job I hated again. Before the Friday night dinner rush, I approached the general manager. "Shannon, I can't do this anymore. Sorry, but I'm leaving now." She took it well. "You realise you'll be unemployable if you don't work your notice, right?" "I don't care." Subconsciously, I left them in the lurch so I wouldn't be rehirable. I didn't want to return. I worked with my dad in construction, giving me time to evaluate. He knew I viewed it as a stopgap until I figured shit out. Then Sam phoned. He was contemplating renting a house in Denver, Colorado, and asked if I'd be interested. I wasn't 100% sure, so I declined, but called him a week later and said yes. I packed my tired old car and realised what the trail had taught me about materialism. It had 200,000 miles on the clock and was worth $500, but I loved it. I had no desire to own anything but the crappiest vehicle in existence. It acted as a people filter. I had little time for those who judged me based on my ride, and it was surprising how few individuals that left. I had high hopes for Denver, but it was tough. I worked a few dead-end jobs until I applied for a vacancy at a marijuana growing farm after Colorado legalised it. I had no experience, but I figured I'd enjoy a change of scene. The interview went well and I got the position. The people are brilliant and the managers treat me with respect, which is more important than money. A co-worker called Adam mentioned his lease was expiring, as was mine, so we looked for somewhere together. He had a service dog and landlords were reluctant to accept it. After weeks of fruitless searching, I suggested the mad idea of living in the woods. I had the gear, it was quiet with no neighbours, no rent, and it was a crazy but exciting plan. He jumped at the chance. We packed and found a spot in Pike National Forest and abided by the forestry regulations by moving camp every 2 weeks. I showered at work, ate well and stayed warm and dry at night. I've not settled since the trail. I realise work is necessary to earn money for the everyday expenses, but I'm unsettled because for months I had freedom. Long-distance hiking, or whatever experience I choose, offers me the release I yearn. I live by each day and don't know what's next. Tomorrow I could be on the other side of the country. To taste freedom, or as close as I can get, I'll pack my bag again for another experience. Sam Daffy Ridge. I swore I wouldn't do it again. I had fun, but after finishing, the last thing on my mind was repeating it. I loved my journey, but there's only so much rain, hunger, tiredness and time in your own head a person can take. It beat me up, hurt physically and mentally, but shit, I was elated to finish. That said, the negativity wore off. A week later, I planned the next one, the Pacific Crest Trail. Day hikes don't do it for me anymore. Why escape for a day when you can immerse yourself for months? It's different out there if you commit. We're rewarded after long periods outdoors with a fresh perspective and appreciation. I hiked the AT to get away from people in the world. I hated both, but over the course of the summer my opinions changed. I couldn't have done it without them. I made new friends and I share a place with one of them. I met my girlfriend on the trail too. I moved to Colorado to be nearer the outdoors and because the weed's legal there. I smoked marijuana most days. It's not as bad as the masses perceive. I now work at a weed growers. I received Manager of the Quarter and I'm in charge of 50 people. I'm still, in many ways, on my trail. I wrote poems on the AT and I look at the pictures. I gained strength, peace and zen. John Thirsty Bashara. I went to Juggles' place in New York and stayed with him, Fozzie and Lasagna. Of the things we could have done, we spent a few days by Lake Placid. We wanted to experience an isolated part of the woods without moving. Perhaps it was too early to go home. When I did go back, the flight crew walked past as I checked in. The pilot noticed my pack and we talked about hiking. It transpired he sectioned height and had completed much of the AT's southern half. The trip to Minneapolis was short. They didn't even offer snacks. You could understand my surprise when the stewardess approached. "You're the hiker, right?" I considered the question, wondering if someone had complained about the odour from seat 34A before responding, "Yes, I am." "The pilot wants to buy you a beer." It was one final, uplifting gesture of trail magic before returning to the city where it meant nothing. I stayed in Minneapolis for a month. The beard and hair were big hits, but I shaved and trimmed in favour of a less conspicuous look. I didn't have trouble reintegrating. People are different in the city. You can't approach them and expect friendliness like in the mountains. My trail stories interested my friends, but they waned the longer I rambled. They wanted to hear about bears, the weather and the food. I ended with a few wild animal anecdotes which served me well whenever someone asked. I left Minneapolis in October with a one-way ticket to Saigon. My plan since graduation had been to teach English abroad. I gained a contact through my sister who taught in Vietnam and contacted him. He sold the lifestyle well, so I packed and left. The trail helped my confidence to make it on my own, to adapt to new people and surroundings, to sleep anywhere and eat anything. The first week was difficult. I kept getting lost, couldn't understand the language, and it was sweltering, but it got easier. I stayed for a year and travelled around Asia. The highlights were Koh Rong Island off the Cambodian coast, where I met my gorgeous Argentinian girlfriend, and a motorbike tour along the Vietnamese coastline. I'm now in Barcelona, Spain, and I'll be heading to Buenos Aires soon. Time outdoors is a big part of my life. I've done nothing longer than a few days since the AT, but I get out often. I finished a section in the Catalonian Pyrenees, and the GR11 is on my long-distance list. The PCT is next, though. I'll adopt the trail name Moses, which Fozzie gave me because of my likeness with the biblical character. The AT encouraged my wanderlust. It provided a foundation of skills and confidence, allowing me to pursue the life of adventure I dreamt of. Advice on the AT? None, except pack your shit and go. Dallas, Bush Goggles, Nustvold. I finished my through hike on August the 20th. I missed the guys and it was a hard decision to leave them, but life is about making tough decisions. I was proud to finish and sitting on Katahdin my future was optimistic. All those weeks of hiking provided plenty of space to think of what lay ahead. Optimistic until I returned home. I fell into the old routine and returned to my job, which I never liked, and moved in with my parents before I found my own place. I lay around, relaxed and ate. Even though I'd stopped hiking, my appetite remained. By Christmas, I'd gained 40 pounds. In 4 months, I'd morphed from a through hiker at the peak of my game to a slob. I knew if I didn't change my life, I'd be unhappy, so I hit the gym. The fat burned off, and with my body in shape, my mind followed. I focused, realised I missed the hiker lifestyle, and took on the Ice Age Trail in Wisconsin. I left in the middle of March, late winter, but it was too early in the season and the trail was deserted. It was a different hike, colder, lonelier, with no hiking family. I faced many challenges, especially the freezing conditions, but I had a blast. I finished 700 miles of the 1050 before the weather defeated me, and my deadline to return to work arrived. I even hiked 54 miles in one day. I spent the summer training for a marathon, which I completed, and I did another one in the fall. In a year, I'd hiked 3,000 miles and run 2 marathons. The AT enters my thoughts every day. I reminisce about the morning climbs, fresh spring water and stunning sunsets. I'll be a slave to my wandering ways forever. Deep feelings urge me to explore. I know I'll through hike again. I've learned to slow and live in the moment. I allow my anxieties to take hold sometimes and I rush. I'm not in a race to my death, so I remind myself to relax, as I did on the AT. I wish every day could be like my Appalachian Trail hike. Chris Juggles Chiappini. Perseverance pays off. If you want it enough, put in the effort and don't admit defeat. This was true for the trail, and having hiked it, the philosophy stays with me. We're capable of wondrous things, but it's not until we challenge ourselves, whether on the AT or elsewhere, that we comprehend them. I returned home to life in New York. The following spring, Lasagna stayed, and we hiked the New Jersey section of the AT. In August, I bagged several 14,000-foot peaks in Colorado. In September, the chance of my dream job came from nowhere. A fellow juggler was leaving his position, and they needed a replacement. He put my name forward and even stipulated he wouldn't train anyone else. After a nerve-wracking wait, I received a call from their Vancouver HQ inviting me to an interview. The waiting game continued, but finally the news came. I got it, and I'm proud to say I juggle for Cirque du Soleil all over the world. I get time off between shows, but not enough to through hike. I take trips in whatever country I'm fortunate to be in. So far, I've seen New Zealand, Australia and Japan. I'm thrilled and lucky. I nurture fond memories from the AT and keep in contact with my buddies. Such a grand way to spend a few months. I miss the mountains, often reflecting on my trip, and I'll through hike again. I adored Maine, and I want to live there. I dream of buying land, building a log cabin and letting close friends have parcels of my land to do the same. It's wild there, quiet, beautiful, and I can't think of a better place to plant some roots. Keith Fozzie Foskett. From Georgia, I traversed north on a slim ribbon of trail over the Appalachian Mountains for 150 days. Through snow, ice, rain, storms, humidity and unbearable heat, I inched closer to Katahdin every day. I witnessed bare trees come alive as my world turned green. Riding a series of rocky waves, I emerged above tree line to survey America's wildlands from my lofty perch. I battled fatigue, illness, stress and emotions, clung stubbornly to my resolve and refused to quit. Many days I woke and doubted if I could continue. I stood in valleys mesmerised by the hulk of mountains towering before me. I willed myself to summits I thought I couldn't conquer. Despite my fears of failure, I remained strong and arrived at camp knowing, for another day, I'd won. The continual yearning to placate my dromomania, to satisfy the nomad and to appease my travelling addiction continues. But I've written a further chapter on being close to freedom. From a teenager who viewed my wanderlust as a curse, I have learned over time to cherish it. I accepted my feelings, nurtured them, and took my calling instead of choosing a more conventional life. I only wish I'd realised earlier. I'd be as fulfilled cycling around the world, taking a lengthy road trip or travelling through Europe for the summer. The goal is freedom, claiming my right to live how I want, not how anyone else thinks I should. As I write this, notepaper sits on the corner of my desk. It's dotted with haphazard scribbles, a list of plans needed to fulfil my next adventure. The culmination of years of planning, months spent in the wilderness for the serious one. I wonder if all my hiking miles to date amount to training for this one. That note is titled The Continental Divide Trail, the last of the 3 big American hikes, 3,000 miles from Mexico to Canada along the Continental Divide. This is the next instalment of my life adventure. Let me tell you, the dromomaniac is ecstatic. Should you hike the AT? Of course. If hiking isn't your cup of tea, accept a challenge which appeals. If you're stubborn enough to make it happen, when you get there, open your eyes. Observe and admire as much as possible. Take mental photos, study, remember and store them. Tuck that file away in your mind and label it The Path I Chose. Choose the road which calls and don't waste time. Respect those who steer you elsewhere, but settle on your choices. You know where to head, you understand where you'll be happy. Please, please find the courage to follow it.